There are roughly 3 New Yorks. There is first the New York City of the person that was born here, person that takes the city for granted and accepts its scale and its turbulence as both natural and inevitable. Second, there is the New York City of the commuter, the city that is devoured by locusts each day and spat out each night. Third, there is the New York of the person that was born somewhere else but came here in search of something. Of these 3 trembling cities, the greatest is the last. The city of final destination, the city that is a goal. It is this third city that is responsible for New York's high-strung disposition, its poetical deportment, its dedication to the arts, and its incomparable achievements. Commuters give the city its vital restlessness. Natives give it solidity and continuity. But the settlers give it passion. Now, this quote from E.B. White, you guys may know him as the writer of Charlotte's Web, is roughly 70 years old. And I get New York City in 1949, very different than New York City in 2019. But there's still truth in it. There's truth preserved in this quote. I find truth in it. You know, I belong to that third trembling city. You know, I came to New York in search of something. I came to New York in search of a better way forward in this fight against climate change. A better way forward as an architect, as a policymaker, as a parent, a partner, as a nerdy black dude that likes limited edition high tops. These are made by Star Wars. You can't get these in the streets. You know what? If I'm being honest, that's the reason why I'm here, but it's not the actual reason why I came here. The reason why I came here is that my partner got an amazing job opportunity here in New York. And so in a matter of 3 months, we Control-Alt-Deleted our lives in Washington, D.C., and moved to Washington Heights, which was terrifying. But I say that not just to add more color to why I'm here, but there's a more kind of salient point that I've been thinking about the last couple days. You know, so I consider myself to be a feminist. I am the son of a woman with ambition, the partner of a woman with ambition, definitely the father of a woman with ambition. And, you know, we often kind of miss these opportunities to be allies and to actively support the women in our lives, and particularly women of color. And it's important that we take those opportunities when we look at aggressive, regressive, and backwards policies being implemented in Georgia and in Alabama and in Kentucky and elsewhere, and Missouri. See, so yeah. It's important for us to recognize that we need to be allies and we need to be able to assist women being appropriately represented in positions of power and influence. Full stop. So for the last 2.5 years, I have been the sustainability director for your great American sanctuary city that is New York. And in that capacity, I have a lot of different responsibilities. But chief among them is that it's my job to paint a very clear picture of where New York City needs to be in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 50 years in terms of our relationship to our home planet. And it's also incumbent upon me to draw a very bright line with policies, with programs from where we are right now to where we need to be. And that may be in transportation, it may be in energy, it may be in food systems, all of the above. The bottom line is that My story, your story, the story of people that come here, that were born here, that just stop by, they all play themselves out in this environment that is lasting. The house that I live in, the apartment I live in, is in a building that's over 100 years old. When you all leave here to go to work today, 90% of the buildings that you will pass will be here in 2050. So that the space, the context around us, it preserves the ability for us to live out our lives and for us to have these new experiences. And in doing that, we find truths that are also lasting. And so there are three truths that I'd like to share with you now that I've come to know as your director of sustainability. First, the climate crisis is scary AF. I get it, right? It's not lost on me. You guys are confronted with gloom and doom every day. People telling you about how bad things are. Maybe you're impacted by towns being erased off the map by wildfires in California. Maybe it's towns that are underwater right now in the Midwest, in western Iowa and in Little Rock. Maybe you're like me and you like to thumb through the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which says that we have about a decade or so left to make significant changes to our greenhouse gas emissions, keeping our global temperature rise under 1.5 degrees. Otherwise, we risk changes that we can't adapt to. And possibly, if you're also like me and you're looking at your house and a sink full of dishes, and you're like, I barely have my act together right now, much less change everything about everything in 10 years. But nevertheless, we're constantly confronted with the reality that things are getting worse. And the bottom line, the climate crisis, it's bigger, it's further along, and it's more pernicious than we give it credit for. And anybody that tells you differently either hasn't done the research or is lying to you to protect themselves and the status quo. So we have to be able to accept that that is something that is daunting, and it's also kind of depressing. And so I get that. And I get that part of my job and what I'm learning now is that it's my job to help demystify that and to help unpack a little bit more between what we have to do and what we must do. So I'm working on that. Second, cities are and aren't perfect. I love cities. I think that we are at our best when we're local. I think that cities kind of give us an opportunity to really kind of, again, explore the best in ourselves. And it's become a point of pride for those of us working in the climate community that cities have stepped up the game. Cities all across the country, hundreds of cities have doubled down their efforts to pursue renewable power, have doubled down their efforts to incubate clean tech and startups that are really kind of advancing this conversation. But it's also, that pride is kind of a bit of a distraction as well. Because the bottom line is that nothing can substitute aggressive federal action. And it's important that we not lose sight of that. Cities can do as much as they can, but they cannot muster the amount of resources that an active federal government can do. I mean, make no mistake, remember, New Zealand, our friends in New Zealand, they banned assault rifles 72 hours after the attacks in Christchurch. Don't tell me that federal action can't make changes that help make people's lives better. So we have to keep our eyes and keep focused on the main objective. And that means being focused not just with our attention, but also our vote. This is a game of numbers. So I would love to be able to make this about winning the hearts and minds of everyone, convincing people with facts that these are the things you should value and the changes that we have to make. But that hearts and minds thing, that time is kind of come and gone. We're in a point now where we have to actively regulate, we have to actively hold people accountable. And we have to make sure that we acknowledge that we have to make big shifts. I mean, there's 8.6 million of you in this city. You're spread out across 300 square miles of space. We have 600 miles of coastline that need to be protected. We need for as many of you as possible to make as many carbon-reducing changes to as many parts of your life in as short amount of time as possible, period. Whatever it takes to get there. So it's that last conversation about the scale, about the need to be ambitious and look and be systemic that has caused me to start to think about a lot of other questions, about a lot of other ways in which we can grow the tent. I think that, I always talk about the movie Jaws, like we need a bigger boat, and I've been really wrestling with that lately, and part of that has made me ask another question, which is, if everyone must act on climate, is it true that everyone can? And this question is at the heart of all the conversations that many of you may be hearing about the Green New Deal, whether it's New York City's Green New Deal or California's or federal Green New Deal. This is at the heart of that question. And really what it's saying and what it's getting to is that fighting climate change is not about preserving our way of life. It's about changing the way we live. And when we get that, and when we start to appreciate that, we start to understand that the challenges that we face, that we're fighting against inequity and social inequality, that's the same side of the coin as the fight that we're fighting against climate change. And they are inseparable, and we will not be able to muster the resources we need unless we tackle them both together. So I wanted to walk you through a few things that we've been doing right here in your city that really start to speak to that inability to separate those two. These are climate actions. Paid family and sick leave. There was a time when someone that was taking care of a family as their primary job for the entire part of their life couldn't take leave legally to take care of their own family. That's done. We've changed that in New York City, and now we have the most aggressive family leave policies in the country. It's worth a clap. Universal pre-kindergarten. If you're a 4-year-old, you're a 3-year-old, you and your parents, you get to go to kindergarten in New York City. And that is something that cascades into a lifetime of learning. And there are study after study that shows the impact that has on your ability to thrive and your ability to contribute, and because we need you. Healthcare for all New Yorks. Many of you know there are 600,000 New Yorkers that do not have healthcare. That ends this summer. If you are a New Yorker, if you haven't had healthcare insurance, if you've been denied healthcare insurance, if you are undocumented and are still a New Yorker, you can get access to the public option for healthcare in New York City starting this summer. Justice reform. And I can talk in depth about this for kind of a long time because it really is something that I'm passionate about. But I'll just make it really simple for you all. All across the country, there are people that are in jail and in prison for crimes that are no longer illegal in the states in which they are imprisoned. Okay? So that fundamentally is a problem. So being able to shift and move away from excessive arrest and incarceration to a place where we are actively promoting treatment and actively separating how we treat people that have addiction versus people that are committing actual crimes is fundamental to us being able to capture that capital and make sure that all of those people are able to contribute fully to our society, both before and after they have entered the system. ID NYC. Yes, also worth a clap. If you're 10 years old or older and you're a New Yorker, you can get an ID. Okay? Doesn't matter what your documentation status is, it means that you can get an identification. That means that you can get access to credit unions, you can get access to medical services, you can get access to museums and libraries. You can be a full New Yorker. And that is something that matters when we take care of those that live within our city. So we start to kind of think about all of these big challenges and the fact that all of them speak to this notion that, again, in order for us to truly, truly be present in this fight, we have to acknowledge that fighting climate change is not, again, about preserving our way of life. It's about changing the way we live. And I'm going to be working on this. I'm building this army. I'm actively painting this path forward and making sure that we can have a bright light as to where we're focusing and where we need to put our attention. But obviously, I cannot do this alone. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to, kind of just, come and work for government. That's not for everybody. I get it. But I don't need you to do that. I need you to stay where you are. The reality is that we need all of you to be bending your skills, your passions, your creativity towards this objective, no matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're working in finance. We need financial models to help us retrofit buildings. We need people that are working in prototyping to be able to move us away from the notion of planned obsolescence, where everything from the cell phone in our pockets to sometimes the sneakers on our feet are made to be worn once and then thrown away. Like, that's something that we need creatives, technologists, and we need all of you to be working on how we solve that. But I also feel it's helpful for all of us to be able to have focus and all of us to be able to direct our attention. So we're going to identify 3 different spaces that I want all of you to be thinking about when you leave here today so that we can actively start to unpack how you can help and how we can move forward together. How can we work better? I mentioned before that we need our buildings to retrofit. We have buildings in New York City where you live, where you work, where you go to school. Those buildings represent 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions in our city. The energy it takes to heat and cool those buildings, as well as to power all of the people and lights and computers within them. We've got to reduce that footprint. A few weeks ago, we passed the most aggressive law ever globally, which is the first of its kind building energy efficiency mandate, which mandates and puts a line in the sand greenhouse gas emissions that large buildings in New York City can emit. So starting in 2024, every building that's a large building that you guys exist in, operate in, and take part in will have to be working towards reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And they're going to need your help. It's going to be something that requires all of us to figure out how we work better. It's not just about sealing up your windows, and it's not just about making your roofs more efficient. It's going to be about changing the patterns of how we work, changing the ability for us to think about the energy we use as a commodity. How do we move electrons in a way that changes the currency of our conversation? All of those are going to require all of you to be able to start to think those clearly, and all of you are going to require the owners of the buildings that you exist in to hold that. You're going to have to hold them accountable. How can we move better? Now, I'm sure that all of you have been eagerly awaiting the arrival of, like personal drones and autonomous vehicles. I too have been waiting for that. But the bottom line is that, we have to think about what we want out of how we move through our city. What I want is for you, the person sitting next to you, your neighbors at home, to be able to walk out of your building and to take whatever means of transit best suits your task, not just what you can afford. So if that is, an e-bike, if that is a bus, electric bus, if that is the subway, whatever it is, we have to be able to fundamentally think about whether or not we've been doing this wrong for a while. And maybe we should be moving towards mobility as a service. And we can get out of the notion that everyone has to own everything. So we should be able to move so that things are all electric and all shared. How we do that is going to be up to you. How can we eat better? Now, this is something that I'm very passionate about, but it's also a very tricky subject. Earlier this year, we expanded our Meatless Mondays program in New York City public schools. New York City public schools have about 1.1 million kids in it, by the way. And so every Monday, those schools are only serving vegetarian options, which is fantastic because we need to rethink and re-understand how we identify and how we have our relationship with meat. Now, it's not something that is going to be easy. I mean, I'm like, my family is from Jamaica. It's a very meat-intensive culture. And so being able to fundamentally kind of shift some of that and think differently, it's going to be essential. There are billions and billions of animals that we are keeping alive, that we are feeding off of, that are taking up resources, water, and emitting enormous tons of carbon. We've got to be able to curb that in a way that acknowledges that we have an existential crisis, and it's not just going to be business as usual. It is not about preserving our way of life. It's about changing the way we live. And so I want you guys to leave here, and throughout the day, you're going to be thinking, okay, the buildings I'm in, how I'm getting there, what I'm having for lunch, all of those things are parts of the components that I think it's important for you to be able to acknowledge. But I also want you to acknowledge that you have a role in this fight. You know, it's not just about tree huggers like me out there trying to make this thing happen. You know, no matter who you are, what you do, where you come from, you know, who you love, like all of those parts are part that make you who you are, and we need you in this fight because we cannot do it without you. I'm counting on you, and I appreciate you giving me the time to talk to you today. Thank you.